started working nights, and now I can't wake up in the day. It is almost 5 p.m. This is the earliest my body will let me wake up now. As I type this on my phone notepad, under the covers of my bed, I can't help but think that I am truly going insane. Maybe you'll believe this story. Maybe you won't. All I can tell you is that what is happening to me isn't just part of working nights and days and days and nights for too long. It has to do with, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. A month ago, I started working nights as a private security guard. The hours, nor the profession itself, was necessarily my first choice for gainful employment, but it was the only way to stay in school and eat. I thought about other nighttime jobs, of course, but I found serving pizza to drunk people, and especially drunk classmates, demoralizing. I figured bartending or working a convenience store late would be equally disappointing, so I settled on this. Besides, a friend from high school had an in with the company and helped me to quickly get a job, and not a moment too soon, as things were getting desperate after I was forced to replace my expensive textbooks due to a faulty fire sprinkler going off and ruining them. Replacing them ate through all of my money I had saved for my summer job. Compared to the minimum wage available at the pizza place, well, technically it was tipped, but college students, like myself, rarely, if ever, tip. Anyway, compared to the other inconsistent paying jobs out there, the security company paid better. Not great at all, but I would be able to get back into the black. Also, they trained me on a taser. Not like a contact stun gun with the arc passing between the two contact points, but an actual taser with the zapping prongs that shoot out. Of course, I had to be hit with it too, which did suck, but it made the job a lot more interesting, knowing that I could wield 50,000 volts if anyone gave me too much trouble. Anyway, the process of becoming a night watchman, a security guard, or if you must, a rent-a-cop, is a fairly involved one. It was frankly more difficult than I imagined for the people I, and probably you, typically associate with the position. You needed to get fingerprinted, background checked, pass a written guard test, and apply for a license from the state. While I found it to be more inconvenient than challenging, it was still more than I expected from an otherwise brain-dead job. Speaking of brain dead, it is mostly watching people and things until the wee hours of the morning. Your mind definitely plays tricks on you. Shadows and noises look and sound a lot different when you've been up all day and then all night. Sometimes it feels like your eyes got crossed, or your hearing turns down like you're underwater. Definitely leads to a lot of stories, most of which my coworkers share on an app at the dead hours of the night, usually between 3 and 5 a.m. I can't tell you how many times my coworkers will say they saw a ghost or a monster, or post pictures of stars and planets and claim that they're UFOs. I guess whatever gets them through the night. Most of the job sites are fairly innocuous, dull even, despite the boasts of my coworkers of getting into fights early every Friday night at some of the student apartment complexes. To the contrary, the only person I ever thought with was myself. I fought with myself to stay awake. Every night it was like an endurance contest to see if I could, in fact, make it through my shift. Then, after a while, well, it wasn't every night, it was every day, seeing if I could get through classes. It only recently dawned on me why my coworkers are lazy, sad, and dull people. Why they usually want the night off, and why all but a few, like my boss, rarely seem to have a knack for being up all night, every night after every night. At first, it really didn't bother me at all. I was actually happy to take their shifts and earn that extra money. And it went great until about the third week when my supervisor, Deborah, took note of me, told me that I was a good guard, a team player, an excellent report writer. A note about Deborah for a moment. She actually had the interview at this stale, crusty, sticky floor dive bar late at night. It was right after my high school friend got in contact with the company's local branch out here and recommended me. So Deborah is a woman in her middle or maybe late 30s, and she looked like she had been doing this job for far too long. Her eyes were sunken and her skin blotchy and pale. She had strained and stringy blonde hair, which she tied back. She had an average build, but her arms and fingers were eerily thin and bony. She was fidgety and nervously tapped a glass of deep red cranberry juice, which I thought at first was wine. It crossed my mind that maybe she did a lot of Adderall or other stimulants to stay awake while on the job, and they had begun to weather her from the inside out. I tried not to judge, especially as an occasional user myself around midterms and finals. She told me that she liked to meet at this bar because she said people revealed their true selves to her there. She told me she never had an undergraduate student working for her, or that she knew of in the entire company before. She spoke with a grainy, monotone smoker's voice at length about the position, the expectations, the report writing, the incidents, and especially the hours, and adapting to them. I think maybe she was trying to dissuade me from taking the job at times, and perhaps I should have just taken the hint right there and backed out. She bought me a beer, even though I told her that I was underage. She told me that the company encourages hard work and equally hard play. After I finished it, despite being an experienced underage drinker, I found myself oddly warm and calm. Something about Deborah's voice seemed relaxing and tingly. Perhaps even seductive, and I was so wrapped up in it. I took several awkward seconds to thank her and accept the job when she formally offered it to me. I remember I stood up and I shook her very cold hand, and it was the first time that I ever saw her smile. And she made this awkward comment to me about how warm I felt. I didn't really think of it much at the time. It was October after all, and it was cold outside already, and it was pretty chilly inside the dive bar also. I think I was just really happy to have the job and be able to start digging myself out of the financial hole I found myself in. Anyway, all of the professional encouragement swirling between us came to a quick end in that third week as I quickly discovered, despite my initial enthusiasm and sense of invulnerability to an unholy combination of late work and early classes, it turned out that working until 5 in the morning, with classes starting at 8 and 10 most mornings, was a unsustainable schedule. At first I tried to brush off the fact that I slept through 2 morning classes and then fell asleep during an afternoon class. But then I fell asleep on the job. As a supervisor, Deborah made her rounds from site to site, basically spying on the employees on random nights to check to see if they were in fact on site, they were doing their jobs, and they were awake. One night I woke up, face down on the counter, at my post, with Deborah shoving a small makeup mirror in my face. Looked at the mirror, saw my reflection, and I had a huge penis drawn in black felt marker on my forehead. Apparently I fell asleep. Some drunk kid drew it on my forehead. She chewed me out, wrote me up, and sent me home. She called the next day, tried to reassure me that I still had a job, but that I was going to be transferred out of the residence sites into a less sensitive location one town over. My new post was unfortunate, not only because the site had a small pay cut per hour, but I would have to drive a company truck there and back each night that I worked. I was already falling asleep on the job. What if I fell asleep on the ride back to campus town? The thought of dozing off and hitting a tree or driving off a bridge into one of the ponds in the area and drowning there really terrified me, and it made the job much more stressful than it previously had been. I would have to sit in a company truck in the parking lot of a small strip mall 9 in the evening until 5 in the morning in a small village about 10 miles outside of campus town. The first time I showed up, the town was virtually deserted, as if asleep by 9, with the only sign of life coming from a flickering street lamp near the entrance of the parking lot. Besides that, it was the stars, the moon, and the late season cicadas. Nothing really happened there. I didn't need to file hourly reports on my phone, unless of course there was an incident, which again, here there never was any. At least at the student apartment complexes there were noise complaints and parties and things to attend to, which kept me somewhat alert on those first 2 weeks. I wasn't even told which store I was supposed to be watching in the strip mall. There was a Subway shop, an abandoned Little Caesars where I could just see the outlines of the storefront where the logos had been, and a combination Goodwill resale store and American Red Cross Center. Deborah simply told me to keep watch. Maybe the parking lot was used by drug dealers or drug users, and my presence there was strictly deterrence. I wasn't sure. I knew the prospect of dealing with people like that wasn't particularly heartening, despite having the taser, which I knew would work on anyone regardless of their intoxication, but it was only one shot, and if I had to defend myself against multiple people, it would become much more dangerous. But all of this was just in my imagination. My fears about fighting drug dealers were dismissed by the 5th night I was working there. Like I said, I didn't see anyone or anything all night. Barely a car passed by. I found myself struggling to stay awake, again, despite drinking 2 or 3 energy drinks a night. I was worried that I would definitely fall asleep on the job again, and I knew I couldn't fall asleep on the job again because I was warned that the company had a 2-strike policy and I already had 1 strike. This was now coming up on last week Thursday. I was supposed to be at the strip mall, but I had got minimum sleep because of studying for finals the last 2 days. I was already wiped out, and so I felt like I had no choice but to take some Adderall to try to get through this shift. Mercifully, my classes were canceled for Friday, so that meant as long as I could get through this shift, I could be sleeping through Saturday night if I wanted to, if I needed it. I was all wired up in the car and fidgeting with the radio, trying to find some kind of rock station with the least amount of static. It was no use, so I just started to use my smartphone to play some music. It was around 11 or so when a pair of headlights pulled up behind me where I was parked, and they started honking at me. My stomach hardened into a brick, because I was at a loss for what to do. It took me a moment or two, but I knew I either had to verify their identity as one of the approved shopkeepers for the site, or try to remove this person and their vehicle from the premises. The vehicle in question was an SUV, not unlike mine. but I really couldn't see who or how many people were inside the truck, as their high beams were still on, as if intentionally used to blind me. I got out of my truck with my flashlight in my left hand and my taser strapped on my belt holster to my right. I could just barely see through the glare that the truck's window was partially rolled down. I tapped my pocket for my smartphone in case I needed to threaten to call the police on this potential trespasser or record my interactions with them. My heart sank as I felt an empty pocket. Damn it, I thought to myself. I'd left it in the truck. Took a moment to gather myself up to go confront the driver and the potential passengers anyway. I had to do it with the toughest face I could muster, despite knowing that I left my best weapon, my smartphone, back in the truck. Through the crack in the window, there came a voice. Hey, aren't you supposed to be asleep? I immediately recognized the voice as Deborah, and I felt a sudden sense of relief, but then awkwardness about it all. I had 3 energy drinks, I yelled back to her, lying. I also had 2 exams today. Excuses. Those don't work on me anymore, she said. Now then tell me, how do you stay awake? I asked her. I still couldn't see her through the glare of the headlights and the window reflections. I didn't really want to approach the vehicle. The partially opened window really spoke volumes about the tenuous circumstances of our current professional relationship. I was still on thin ice with her, with the company. After all, I was out here at this site more or less being punished. There's no magic to it, she shouted over the idling engine. Maybe if you get off the blacklist, I'll give you a few pointers. Well, I think I'll get off the blacklist sooner with those pointers now, I shot back. Deborah then flung a small bottle of something at me from the cracked open window. I barely caught it with my free hand. I turned the bottle around. It wasn't anything spectacular. It was some off-brand, presumably an energy drink with a screw-top plastic bottle. It looked a lot like a 6-ounce Gatorade bottle. It was called Beast Blood, and a flavor called Berry Legal. The ingredients list was partially torn off. Thanks, I said. Have a good night. Don't screw this up. That was the last thing that she told me before rolling up the window and backing out of the lot, heading back towards Campus Town. It was back to me, the stars, and the moon. The one parking lot light always finally flickered out about this time of the night. I was shocked how quickly that one interaction with her sent me from practically grinding my teeth with squirrely energy to weighted eyelids. Unfortunately, I didn't pack any energy drinks tonight because the Adderall usually sticks with me a lot longer. So I was stuck with Berry Legal, flavored Beast Blood. I screwed open the top, which didn't crack open like a bottle should if the security ring was locked. Whatever this off-brand crap was, it truly wasn't even very legal. But I thought if it worked for Deborah, it would work for me. It would have to, at least just for tonight. Very legal wasn't what it was cracked up to be. It was poorly mixed, overly sweet at the top and bitter and chemically at the bottom. Nevertheless, I polished it off in basically one long gulp. I was expecting heart palpitations, racing thoughts, sweating, and jitteriness. Instead, it was more like lighting a firecracker, only to be crestfallen by a puff of smoke and some fizzing. In fact, I felt even more like my eyelids were anchored down to my cheeks, and that I was about to doze off. turned off the heat in the car and rolled down the window partway to let the October chill in to discomfort me. I blinked twice, and 11 p.m. became about 1:30 in the morning. I felt this swirling, warming daze around me as I opened my eyes and my gut lurched to the sight of the time. I had this terrified and disappointed surge across my entire body like an electrical jolt, almost like when I was tasered during training. It turned to a groggy weakness that flashed between alertness and readiness. I heard this pulsing ringing in my ears, and at first I thought I'd been hit over the head and knocked out, but then I realized it was coming from outside of the truck. It was coming from a shrill alarm in one of the strip mall shops. The shrill alarm shattered the crisp fall air. I fell out of the truck, still disoriented with my flashlight and my taser on my belt. I slammed the door loudly. That was really stupid, I thought to myself. Someone was here, and now they knew that I was alert, that I was outside the steel of the truck. I stopped and looked around. There were no other vehicles visible in the lot and none in the storefront. None of the storefront windows or doors were smashed. It occurred to me that it was probably a false alarm, and that I could find the alarm box in the building and reset it with the site instructions I had on my app. At a minimum, I could at least call Deborah and see if she had the instructions on how to reset the alarm. I couldn't figure it out on my own. The only keys I had for this site were for the building's back door, where there was a small hallway connecting the backs of all the stores, and there was a restroom, which I was really the only one on site that I could use. I walked around the only accessible side of the building to reach the back. I didn't see anything unusual. The chain link fence was intact, the back door was clearly shut, seemingly secure. I let myself breathe a sigh of relief as I approached the door. I continued to shake off the nap as best as I could. I felt kind of mentally twisted in several different directions by the smolders of the Adderall and the stress of the alarm scare, and whatever the hell was in that beast blood. The frigid fall air wasn't helping much as a headache creeped in on me. There was some rustling in the dumpster, and I flipped on my flashlight and held it up over my head. "Hello?" I shouted into the dark as a fat black cat jumped through the small hole in the chain link fence and disappeared into the field behind the mall. I told myself to get a grip, and I proceeded to the door to turn off the damn alarm. I turned the knob in the door, and apparently I was still impaired because it should be locked, so it was dumb and futile to make that mistake. Except that the door was very much unlocked, and I thought about it for a second that maybe there was an intruder. But an intruder wouldn't have a key. Maybe there was a new employee and they didn't know about the alarm or how to shut it off. Maybe they needed help with that. Maybe there was no one there at all and someone just forgot to lock up for the night and the alarm was triggered by accident, like how a spider could set off a smoke detector. I opened the door to the back hallway, and it was already apparent which store had the alarm going off. It was the Goodwill American Red Cross store. I walked down the narrow hallway, past the restrooms, and into the back door of the Goodwill resale store. It was the only way to access the junction between the Red Cross and the Goodwill store, where I remembered Deborah had said the alarm box was at. I couldn't find a light switch back there, so I took out my flashlight again and shone it around. I jumped as the shadows of mannequins fluttered around with the turn of my hand on the light. I remember laughing at myself a little. I remember feeling hypocritical for thinking less of my coworkers for their ghost and UFO reports every night. an unfamiliar store at night, in the dark, under the illumination of a jerky flashlight, definitely be creep-inducing. What was more interesting, though, was that the alarm noise suddenly stopped. And maybe I should have stopped right there as well, shrugged it all off, and just went back to the truck. But I kept going. At the time, I thought I needed to do my job and see if anything else in this building needed my attention. After all, I had fallen asleep on the job, again, in the truck, and if I left this alarm unresolved, that would certainly be my strike too. So I powered my way through the maze of shadows, old clothes, creepy dolls, and a wall of VHS tapes in the resale shop, to the junction between the shop and the Red Cross. The sign on the door to the Red Cross encouraged the resale shoppers to stop in today and donate blood. I opened the door, and I found two small clinic rooms and a partially open metallic fridge door. Like a very large fridge door, like the kind at a gas station where all the beer is kept. The alarm box was smashed, and pieces of the chipboard and plastic were strewn across the corridor. Again, I should have left right then and there. I should have left that second. I reached for my smartphone to take pictures of the damage and then to call the police, and that's when I found out I didn't have it on me. I left it in the truck. Again. Then I went and I did the thing you're not supposed to do in a horror movie. I pushed open the fridge door. There was a white tile room that was very cold and got bigger towards the left side of the room. It was filled with bags of blood and coolers to transport it. Turned out this facility had a blood bank, and I shone my light around, checking the first and second corners of the room on my right, before shining my light into the third corner at the left. I was struck with abject terror at what I had saw. There was a smear of blood, redder than red, closer to black, all over the third corner of the room. And in that pool and crimson backdrop was a pale, white, human-like figure, hunched over with torn clothes, wet and glossy and spilled blood. Curled up in the corner with a bag of blood in its mouth. I watched in horror as it sucked down a bag of blood like a toddler would messily suck down a bag of Capri Sun fruit punch. Its long, bony white fingers of its one hand blushed away the strained blonde hair from one of its eyes. Its eye, at least one, was bright red, with an all-white pupil that widened and shrank as it seemed to visually dissect me from head to toe. I was absolutely frozen. If I had to pee, I certainly would have peed myself at the time. I felt my blood pressure drop to the floor. I felt my stomach turn to concrete. I burst into a hard, terrible sweat. I felt faint at first, but then a deep pounding struck me square in the chest. I was transfixed as I watched its skin on its arm and partially exposed legs take on a more human flesh tone rather than the sterile light. Its hair first turned black and golden, but its eye remained the same as it continued to suck down blood from the leaky bags on the floor, one right after the other. It made no sound. Only the sound of the fridge churned the air. This went on longer than I expected myself to be able to stand in one place and watch this monster, this brilliant, shadowless monster devour blood. Cold blood, nonetheless, when I had warm, hot blood in myself. I think I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I just choked a little as I slowly backed out of the room and fumbled to get the taser out of my holster as I tried to shut the door as I went. At that point it rose up. I could see more of its face in the light. It was rippling between an inhumanly pale and humanly flesh tone. Its clothing, its actual clothing, bounced between a state of wholeness and unraveled disheveledness. The parts of its mouth, cheeks, nose, and forehead were glossy and shiny with blood. Before it came to a full stand, it jumped across the room, a leap that would put a cat to shame. It was more like it just flew. I instinctually drew and armed and fired the taser from my hip. The laser sight against its ungodly paleness promised me a decent hit. And even though I hit it squarely in the body with both prongs, the pop and crackle of the taser seemed only to make the creature slightly flinch. Fortunately, that flinch shielded me partially from the direct assault as it fell into the heavy fridge door instead of me. I stumbled back, but I managed to secure it shut all the way. I dropped the worthless taser. Whatever it was started to shriek as it seemed too blood-slick to grip the handle properly to try to open the door. I dropped the keys, and then I picked them up, and by sheer quick thinking alone, I was able to lock the door. But not before I accidentally broke off the key inside the lock. The creature inside pounded on the door, shrieking a horrible sound that seemed to permeate me and resonate off my insides and in my head. It was a slow, warming feeling, but it was also alarming and deeply unsettling. I turned and slipped. My shoes were covered in blood. I was so freaked out that I slipped on the tiles for a few seconds before gripping another door handle and pulling myself up and running to the resale shop. I slammed the back door shut and I tried to lock that, but then I realized that the keys had fallen out of my pocket. My heart sank as I booked it towards the truck, past the dumpster, around the long backside of the building to the parking lot. Prayed and prayed. I left the truck doors unlocked. I ran to the side of the car and firmly gripped the door handle, and thankfully, I left the doors open. I checked the back seat, and the back seat was clear. The passenger seat was clear, so I hopped in and slammed the door and locked it. I cried. For the first time in my young adult life, I seriously just sat there in the passenger seat, cried. I didn't have the truck keys. I was stuck there till help arrived. That's when I grabbed the phone out of the center console and dialed 911. But the phone not only lost signal, it turned off entirely. And that's when I noticed a white fog beginning to fill the air around the truck. All of the lights in the truck went dead. My flashlight, still on in the back seat, also just simply flickered off. The fog was slightly luminous, but also entirely obscuring. I couldn't see out of it as it seemed to wrap around the entire vehicle, blotting out the rear and side windows first before fully engulfing the windshield. I was frozen in that seat. I was wrapped up in watching the ethereal milky smoke swirl around the truck until it started to pool into the truck from the heat vents. The smoky, almost fibery substance floated into the passenger seat and then started to thicken into a lump, like someone twirling soft serve ice cream into a cone. The mass congealed back into the creature, with its body facing away but with its head, very human-like head, turned towards me, with still just that one blood red and marble white eye peering at me. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack or throw up, or both at the same time, as the creature's neck seemed to telescope towards my face, with the one white eye unblinking. Its face still dark, and yet still glistening with blood. Its mouth didn't open, but I could hear it say something. I could hear it talk in the back of my head, and it just told me, "You are very warm." I blacked out, and when I came to, I was surrounded by EMTs and police. I felt weak. I felt like I had spent 24 hours climbing a mountain, or I had just run a marathon kind of weak. Like the kind of weak I couldn't lift my arms over my head to save my life. I could hear the EMTs were frantically trying to get a blood transfusion going, and a police officer asked me if I could identify who had attacked me. I tried to remember, and then I just started screaming. I was screaming as they put me in the ambulance, and I screamed most of the way to the hospital until I passed out again. Later, I was calmer, and I just had the sense that I couldn't tell the police what really happened. So I more or less made something up, and they filled in the evidence for me. They had told me that I was stabbed in the back, behind right shoulder twice, by either something like an ice chipper or like a screwdriver, and that I had lost a considerable amount of blood, and I was found by the shopkeepers the next day. They had a lot of questions about how the vehicle was apparently locked, and despite losing so much blood, none of mine was actually found at the scene. There was also no video either from the truck or from the stores. They did find the smashed alarm and some empty blood bags on the floor of the blood bank. They also told me that apparently this was the third time this year that the blood bank had been broken into. I was off the schedule the next morning. Deborah called me and she told me that I could have as much time off as I needed because she told me that I'd be back. I didn't reply to those texts. At first, I didn't want to think at all about what had really happened. I didn't think the wounds on my back were real because I could barely see them in a mirror, but when I reached back, I could feel the deep grooves. Like I said, that was last Thursday. I'm tired all of the time during the day now. The brighter and sunnier it is, the sleepier I am. I can't go to class. I sleep all day. But at night, I feel normal. Mostly normal, at least. Sometimes I feel quite better than normal. I feel sharper, unstoppable. At least until the sun comes up. I also feel hungry all the time. Every night it grows a little worse, no matter what I try to eat or drink. As I lay here, the sun is going down. I can almost poke my head out from under the covers. It's almost time for me to go to work. I don't think I could ever fall asleep on the job again. I'm scheduled to go back to the strip mall tonight. Back to the blood bank. I'm kind of excited about it in an odd way. And what's more, my career is really advancing. I'm supposed to be training a new employee tonight. Deborah just texted me. She wanted to remind me that I'm working tonight, and to ask me how the pointers she gave me are working out.